2023. My name is Megan Bickford, and I am a career services team member here at SNHU. I'm here this evening to facilitate, oh my gosh, if I could speak, facilitate this session. And you'll see me in the chat throughout the session, responding to your messages and keeping track of your questions. At the end of Jamie's presentation, we'll hold a 15-minute Q&A. Certainly, if we have more time, we will do that if it allows, but we've dedicated 15 minutes to answering your questions after Jamie gives us some great info. So before we get started with anything, we have a few important announcements. Jamie, do you want to hop to the next slide when you're ready? So this session is being recorded. It's important you know that there is no obligation to have your camera on or to use the chat. If you simply want to be here as a guest to take in the information, that is absolutely fine. You can turn on captions for this session by selecting the More button at the top of your Teams screen, and then from there you would select the Turn on Live Captions option from the drop-down menu. Your microphone is going to remain muted for the duration of this session to reduce background noise. So we encourage you to chat and communicate in the chat function. Some of you may be familiar with the hand raising function in Teams, and unfortunately, because we cannot unmute you, that may not be as helpful. So I would definitely say, leverage the chat. Feel welcome to share your information there. We ask that you be kind and refrain from using any inappropriate language or sharing any offensive or private personal information. We're all here to learn and engage with this community, and we appreciate your cooperation. Please do not photograph, screenshot, or record anyone in attendance. Presentation slides may contain clickable links. For those viewing this presentation on a mobile device, we'll include the links in the chat as well so that you can retrieve them at the end of this presentation or when it's convenient for you without being pulled away from the session. You'll also see that Teams offers helpful presentation options like changing the written language of the slides and an opportunity to move through the slides at your own pace. If you decide to move the slides and check out what's ahead, you can get back to where we are by using the red box that says Sync to Presenter, and this will not impact anybody else's viewing experience. Though I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable, to just stay present with Jamie as she goes through this important discussion. Okay, ready for the next one. So now I just want to take a moment to share SNHU's access and accommodations information, which serves as a reminder of resources available to our community members. So your experience here at Southern New Hampshire University is important to us. It's our policy and our practice to create an inclusive and accessible learning environment. If there are aspects of this presentation's design or delivery that present barriers to accessibility, please notify the appropriate department. For online students, please connect with the Online Accessibility Center by emailing oac@snhu.edu or by phone at 866-305-9430. For campus students, please contact the Campus Accessibility Center by emailing cac@snhu.edu or by phone at 603-644-3118. For staff and faculty, please contact the Human Resources Office by email at hr@snhu.edu. Okay, now it's time to introduce our presenter. I'm thrilled to be getting you all started with Navigating Employee Discrimination, presented by Jamie Phipps. Jamie is originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, and currently resides in Kentucky. She has her bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in chemical dependency counseling and her master's degree in counseling, both from Morehead State University. She's previously worked as an admissions counselor, a guidance counselor, a college and career counselor, and most recently as Assistant Chief Diversity Officer for Student Activities, working with Title IX hiring committees, affirmative action, and the employee grievance process, which sparked her passion for empowering employees to advocate for themselves and their rights when faced with difficult situations. She currently works as a career advisor at SNHU and is looking forward to connecting with you more during this session. So, without further ado, I will pass the virtual microphone over to Jamie.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all so much for joining this session this evening. And I'm very excited to be able to share this information with you all. And I just wanted to provide a few additional reminders. So I just wanted to remind everyone that discussions and questions may get very personal, and that adds to the authenticity of these types of conversations. And so I ask that you all join me in creating a safe space where everyone can share as openly and honestly as they would like. And again, please be courteous and respectful. And then I also want you all to know that this information is intended to educate and not be seen as legal guidance. But I am definitely going to share some different outlets for you all to be able to gain that additional information should you need it. And then lastly, I think it's also important to remember the intent versus the impact of the information. Sometimes you can have really good intentions, but that still have a negative impact. So we want to make sure that this information is used for good and empowerment through these types of situations and not used to be harmful. The agenda for the session, we will dive into some different types of discrimination and bias, as well as some career specific protection. And then we will identify some discrimination and sometimes when those rights are being violated, and then steps to the 4E action plan, as well as resources to be able to be aware of should a situation like this arise. I wanted to start off with some statistics, and I'd like you to keep these things in mind as we go through this PowerPoint presentation. These are some truly alarming numbers as far as it goes for the amount of people that will experience some type of discrimination or abuse within the workplace. And so I really think that these numbers show the importance for knowing how to protect yourself and make a plan should you experience similar situations or know how to better be able to support others who might be going through similar things. And I also think it's important to note here the amount of people that might have been sent this survey but did not feel comfortable answering honestly or answering at all. The steps to the 4E plan include educate, empower, evaluate, and execute. And I wanted this to try to be as easy to remember as possible. Educating yourself. So this is an important step no matter where you work or who you work for. Educating yourself on the processes and regulations are very important in knowing what steps to take if a situation comes up. While doing this proactive work, it can definitely help you feel less overwhelmed in the event that a situation has arose. That way you don't have to be collecting all the information or figuring out what steps are needed to take place. Some key definitions that I'd like you all to keep in mind, and this information comes from the US Department of Labor. And so, with that, one specific one is the retaliation. And oftentimes we think of retaliation in the literal sense. So, we think anytime, someone does something against us. But when it comes to employment rights, it truly is that act of trying to hold someone back from further reporting or seeking assistance in the event that discrimination is taking place. These are the different dimensions of diversity. And while this list does not include all of them, these are many of the ways that we identify ourselves. The ones that are highlighted, those are the ones that are considered protected classes. And then there is that law specific protection that also takes place. So if you feel that you are being discriminated against in one of these areas, it is protected by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and you can reach out to them for additional assistance. Another thing that I think it's important to identify in these types of situations is what type of bias might be coming into play here. And so explicit bias is something that is very conscious, and it takes place with a lot of thought behind it, and it's kind of more planned and organized, whereas that implicit bias, that happens without thinking, and it often just comes out. And so that's oftentimes is what's considered a lot of those microaggressions that also take place within the workspace. And so with identifying which type of bias is coming into play, it can really help when knowing what types of resolutions could be most beneficial. For instance, if it is a situation that is identifying explicit bias, a lot of the times there's going to be more work and intervention that needs to take place because it is more ingrained within the person. Whereas the implicit bias, a lot of the times those conversations can, make progress with providing education as well as trainings because again, it's those things that they're not as aware of. And so this is the list of laws that are enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And this information is also provided in the chat. And so I'm not going to dive into, what specifically is covered under these laws, but I do want you to know that it covers, a wide range of kind of identities that you would have. And so definitely there's that civil rights side of things, the Equal Pay Act that falls underneath there, as well as age discrimination, the Americans with Disability Act. And so this is a lot of really, really good information to be able to reach if you think that someone is directly discriminating against you based on one of these things. The next step is empowering yourself. And as you all could see by the statistics, this is truly something that a lot of people sadly will face within their work experience, or they will know someone that is experiencing these types of things. And so it's important to know that you have options, and that also acknowledging that there's a lot of emotions that go into these types of situations. It can be extremely traumatizing and triggering, to have someone actively be discriminating against you and then those feelings coming back up, in the workplace. And so I want you all to know that it is important to seek support, whether that be internal or external to the organization, speaking with supervisors, HR representatives, really whoever, you feel is going to be, a good support system in your corner in this type of situation. I also think it's really important to remember the main picture, the big picture of the problem, especially should you decide that you want to move forward in reporting it. Again, there's so many emotions that become involved, and so it's really easy to focus on those emotions that are associated with that. And typically, outside of those emotions, that's where that true resolution can take place. And so we want to make sure that we allow space for that to happen. And then it's also really important to step back and evaluate the situation. Some common questions that you can ask yourself, um, again, just evaluating all of the things that are going on. Who is involved? When is this happening? It's really important to identify if this is an isolated incident or if this is repetitive behavior that is taking place. And then also if it's something that is prohibiting or causing issues, conflicts with the way that you are doing your job, because that is definitely something that is going to be very, very important moving forward if it's something that is creating issues in your daily work and task. And then it's also important in this kind of evaluation step to check in and make sure that you've read your company's discrimination policies and handbook, as well as the way that they deal with these types of situations. So that way you know what to expect should you need to move forward. I think it's also important to identify if you have any documentation regarding this information. So, if the discrimination is happening via email or is it happening, more in face to face conversations, that's very important to identify. And then, two, if you decide that you plan on moving forward and speaking with a supervisor or speaking with human resources, it's very important if the situation involves another person that you get their consent before putting their name kind of into the situation. There are multiple reasons why someone might not want to come forward. And so it's really important to make sure that you have their permission before, again, putting their name out there, because that could cause a lot more specific problems for that individual. And then lastly, I think it's very important to consider the desired outcomes of the situation, kind of ideally what would happen for that resolution to take place. And then executing a plan geared towards resolution. You have multiple options, and so we're going to dive into a few different ones, but I want you to know that this list does not include all of the ones that are out there. And so it's really important to figure out which option is going to be the best fit for you individually and the situation that you're dealing with. So, when it comes to resolving the situation on your own, number one with this option, I think it's important to identify your level of comfortability. If you do not feel comfortable trying to resolve this situation on your own, don't. I'm a firm believer in listening to your intuition when it comes to these sorts of things. And I think that if you feel that it is an unsafe space, and that doesn't just mean, physically unsafe or anything like that, but emotionally unsafe for you to begin that conversation, then I think that, then that's something that you should go with. So it's important to try to, deal with the situation as soon as possible, but definitely give yourself time to be able to process your feelings in the situation. I think it's important to try to discuss the matter in a way that you and the other person feel comfortable. And a lot of the times, if you can, I think it's beneficial to do so in a neutral place. So that way you can also remove some of those, barriers that you all might not really notice are there. And, no matter how you kind of feel about the situation, it's important to try to show that active listening and participate in that conversation and try to communicate what the issues are effectively, and then see if you all can find some common ground and identify what solutions both of you would be comfortable with. And then lastly, it's also extremely important to know when to bring in a third party into the conversation if you do plan on trying to address it on your own. And then proactive planning. And so these things, might not be as, just active steps, but again, they're very, very important that you can do depending on what you feel you should do about the situation. And so I think it's important, if you feel comfortable, you can have an informal or formal conversation with your supervisor. I think even if you decide not to address the situation necessarily head on, or pursue the multiple steps for reporting it and kind of having that official investigation be done, I think it's important to document the situation so that way you have it in your records, again, in case something like this comes up. And then I also think it's important to continue developing those conflict resolution skills and learning different ways, for you to be able to navigate the conversation, you know, and feel comfortable in doing so. And I think that that looks different for everybody. So it's really important to acknowledge where you feel comfortable and, kind of the areas you feel like you would like to explore more options. When it comes to filing a complaint with human resources, I think it's very important to remember, even if that is a conversation that a lot of people say is off the record or more of that informal conversation, if it starts like that, it's important to know if anything that you say breaks company guidelines, ethics policies, or again, these laws that are set by the EEOC, that this conversation is essentially no longer off the record. And so those human resources professionals, they do have a duty to act when they, find out that these things go against those policies and laws. And so I want that to be very, clear for everyone that if you begin that conversation, if one of those things are identified, then they do have to take the necessary steps. It's also important to know that that formal complaint is just the first step of that formal investigation process. And so once you begin that process, and oftentimes it is a written process with your organization, then that will begin that investigation process. And so that's when they will be looking into those claims, seeing if they can find any supporting information, and then, possibly seeing what types of decisions need to be made. If you do file an official grievance, I do want you to know that if you don't agree with the findings of that investigation, there is a window of time that you have to be able to appeal the decision and then kind of have it looked at by a higher committee. And so that's definitely something if you feel like you're unsure, if that resolution is going to fit what you're looking for, it's important to know your organization's policy for how many days you have before you're able to file that appeal. And then again, there's that reminder if you have witnesses or people that would, again, like to come forward and say they've possibly seen this type of discrimination or seen the situation play out, you definitely want to make sure that it is okay with them before that information is given to HR. Additionally, when you come to that meeting, kind of filing that complaint, it's important to try to be as detailed as possible so that way they're able to explore all of the information. And another big part of that is confidentiality is a big part of the process, but that also goes both ways. And so HR will not let you know necessarily the specific things that are going to be in place to try to provide that resolution. So for instance, if, the employee has to seek some, additional training or, have some additional conversations with their supervisor, they also are entitled to confidentiality within the situation. And so that's not always information that can be shared, but again, they will let you know those general findings and kind of what they found with the process. When it comes to filing a complaint outside of your organization, one popular place that is done is through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission because again, they have those specific laws in place for that protection in the workplace. And so they do have a time limitation in which you are able to essentially file charges and begin that investigation process. So it either has to be 180 days or 300 calendar days from the day of the specific incident. And so with that, they let you know on the website, they provide some different information. And as well as I definitely recommend calling them if you want to explore this option, but they will let you know, depending on kind of what type of situation is, what days limitation are provided with that. And you are not able to file those charges over the phone, but you are able to begin those conversations and still seek that guidance from them. The charges have to be filed either in person at a state office or by mail. And so those are two of your best options. And then we also provided the link that was sent out that is going to take you directly to their page, and it will let you know the different options of where your local office would be for having those types of conversations in person. And I also think when you decide, if you're going to file a complaint outside of your organization, it's definitely important, to consider what options you have, tried throughout, because that's definitely one of the things that they are going to ask you, kind of what steps have you taken either within your organization or on your own to try to resolve the situation. So I also want you all to keep that in mind. And then these are just some general things to avoid as a whole. Again, focusing on the other person's attributes and not so much their actions. And again, I think that's a lot of the times, understandable because these situations do, provoke so many real emotions that are extremely difficult to deal with. And so you really want to, try to focus on their actions in the situation and where that specific discrimination is taking place, and not so much that they're not a good person or they just don't like you and kind of those sorts of things. I think as a whole it's important to try to not share what you feel the other person's consequences should be, again, unless asked by HR. Sometimes that is something they will ask, what things do you feel are acceptable resolutions. And then I think that that is a perfect, opportunity to go ahead and discuss some possible options that you might have, but you don't want to go ahead and, spread that information or try to make that decision for them. You definitely want to try to limit the conversations with, others in the workplace who aren't as directly involved within the situation, just because that can definitely, cause problems sometimes throughout the investigation, when there's a lot of hearsay going around. You definitely do not want to post about the situation on social media or send company wide emails or things like that. You definitely want to try to, again, allow that space for that resolution to take place, with that active and effective communication skills, and try to not, add any additional problems that could damage the resolution, your future options as an employee, or damage your credibility throughout the experience. And then I also think it's important, to try not to threaten to leave the organization. That is something that I definitely have seen in different HR situations in the past. And I do think it's important, that it is okay to identify if, the situation is a non-negotiable for you and you might explore other options. But again, that shouldn't be done in a, threatening way. That's more of, again, just having that open communication with them that that is creating, a considerable issue for you and you are seeking to find that resolution. And then here are some specific resources that we sent out in the chat as well. And there is the EEOC's hotline number. And so, again, if you are experiencing a situation like this, or someone is, and you would like to have some additional conversations to see, what things can be done, I think that that is a really, really great resource. They also have a list of frequently asked questions. And so I think that that is important to utilize as well. You may be able to get some of your answers, without calling in. But again, I think if you need to have that additional dialogue, then I absolutely recommend doing so. And then lastly, I just wanted to show you all just how those frequently asked questions, kind of how they look and the links that are associated with them. So again, some really, really great information to be able to access. And then after that, I am ready to open it up for questions. I hope that that provided some really good information for you all. And I hope that you all feel empowered to know, again, what those steps look like should you need to act in one of these types of situations. And I'm excited to hear what your questions are.
Thank you, Jamie. Well done. What great information to give us all to get started here. So we had a couple of questions in the chat. So one of our attendees was asking about employers not sharing regulations or standards. So I confirmed the question is the scenario is that they have asked their employer to share industry regulations and standards, and the employer has declined and said that that it sounds like essentially um, wouldn't share the handbook, the employee handbook, with employees. So they are wondering if that is something, what might you suggest you do in that scenario?
Absolutely. I think, if it is, it sounds like a direct supervisor that might not be providing that additional information. And sometimes sadly that absolutely can be the case. In a situation like this, I do think it is important to see if you can try to reach out to one of your human resources professionals, or if it's an in-person office, dropping by and just having a chat with them. That is, the handbook is definitely something that they will have, quick access to be able to provide for you. It's usually something that is included in hiring packets and things like that. And so I would just stop by and say, hey, misplaced my copy or might not know where it's at. Don't know if I ever received one. Is this something that you could provide me? A lot of the times they will be able to do it over email. And so I definitely recommend sending them an email as well. And then I would see, kind of just how that process might work. But there definitely, should be someone within your organization, even outside of your supervisor, that should have access to that information. And so I would definitely try to continue going through some of those different avenues to get it.
Great, that's really helpful. Excellent perspective. Yeah, so if it is a direct supervisor going to HR, um, and really starting there, seeing where else you might be able to get it from the company, because that is an important part of your work experience, having access to that. Okay, so we got another question in the chat. An individual shared that they are physically disabled and they wondered our perspective on disclosing that information in an interview. So, for your knowledge, Jamie, I've shared that in general, we would say that disclosing something like that is a personal preference, but there are some standard practices and that I shared a resource here, but what's your perspective on that?
I would definitely agree with that. That it's definitely going to, depend on the specific situation. And then I'm also trying to find that, Megan, because I also got a little. Can you repeat the ending part of the question for me?
Sure, yes. So the question was, I have a physical disability and I'm wondering if I should divulge that during an interview.
Absolutely. So that is one of those personal things. It really depends on the specific situation, kind of if you feel comfortable sharing that. That is one of the protected classes, and that is one of the things that does fall under those EEOC laws. And so, that's definitely one of those areas where they shouldn't be discriminating against you. But of course, we're definitely, going to acknowledge that that does happen. And so, I would say it's whatever you feel best and whatever level of kind of transparency you want to offer to them. And so I think that could, be dependent on the specific position, kind of how that would affect you personally and those types of things. So I think it's important to just kind of weigh those options, but know there's no wrong answer really when it comes to that. And, I think anytime you're, trying to lead with that authenticity and, trying to bring, that your full self to the picture, I think that that's always really important.
Great response. Yeah. Um, okay. So we received another question as well. Um, This one was I worked for a fire and water restoration company when I was pregnant, and they cut my hours, saying there was no work. But another female I worked with said that there was a lot of work. Was that a form of discrimination? So I shared Just to get the conversation started, Jamie, shared a little bit about making sure you check in with a legal resource to really get a yes or no solid answer on something like that and to get legal guidance. But what's your perspective on this?
Absolutely. So definitely the legal guidance is a big piece to a situation like this. And the true answer is it absolutely could have been, but it also, could not have been. And so that's, the important thing with the type of situation like that and how, HR or the EEOC, they're going to really come in and try to see how can we prove that that is what happened or what does the evidence support that that's specifically what happened. And in a situation like that, it can, sometimes be difficult. Was that the reason why, or was there legitimately no hours? But I would, definitely say that if you feel that it's something, that is a possibility and, something that you feel that you want to pursue, I would definitely, reach out, for that legal guidance or, again, directly calling the EEOC and kind of talking through that situation with them and seeing, their thoughts on the matter.
Excellent. Thank you. And I would say maybe too, keeping in mind the time frame that you shared with us, right? So keeping, timing in mind, it might be something that you would need to act on quickly if any time has gone by. Um, okay. So I think this is one of our last questions that we received so far, and then I'll check if there's more. But we received a question that was, um, this was sort of to the group in general, but for your perspective, Jamie, has anyone experienced queer discrimination or maybe the opposite? Does your work support non legal names or pronouns? I'm non binary. I want to be unapologetically myself, which we love and support. And we're not sure how to approach that kind of environment. So, do you have any suggestions for finding companies that will support you as you are, or framing your job search so maybe you don't end up in a position where you might, of course that could happen anywhere, but what are the things we can do to help ourselves find a good fit?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for sharing that information with us as well. Whoever asked that question, I greatly appreciate it. And that is something that number one is becoming more and more a topic of conversation within different workspaces. How can we more actively, accommodate our employees and make them feel comfortable to be able to use, whatever pronouns they like and everything like that. And so, I do think that it is important, to again do a little bit of that research, on those companies and organizations. Are they using inclusive language on their websites? Are they really providing those spaces, for you to be able to be your most authentic self and also, to be able to be around other like-minded people, if you would like to as well. And so I think that especially, kind of post COVID and kind of, employers are more leading with those things that are really, really important to them and what they value as a workplace. And I think that that is making it a little bit easier to be able to see how that employer feels on those types of issues. There are also some really good resources where, through the Trevor Project and places like that, where they are combining jobs and companies that are those safe places for employees. And so I also think it's important to utilize some of those resources. LinkedIn has a lot of, different learning information about how to identify those types of things. And so I really think it's important to utilize, all of your different resources. I think it's important, if you are newly looking for employment and seeking job opportunities to, I think those are some really great questions to be able to ask in some different ways within interview settings, and different places like that to really be able to, see how they feel, especially if that is going to be a deciding factor for you for employment. I think there's no, kind of problem with, being really intentional about how you seek those resources and opportunities and also seeking those other safe and supportive spaces.
Oh, great. Okay, so we do actually have a few more questions in here. We may not be able to get to them all, so you can certainly reach out to career services, and I'll share our contact information in the chat shortly if we don't get to your question and you still have questions remaining today. Um, but we have a attendee who is asking, they've given us a lot of great context, but most importantly, a little bit of the root of the question is how to navigate tough questions during an interview. Um, for example, why are you unable to work full time if it's related to being a caretaker? Um, it looks as though maybe they were asked about a health status. So, do you have any tips for how to address these types of questions in an interview?
Absolutely. And so, first off, I want to start with, you only have to share what it is that you feel comfortable sharing. And so, if it is a question that, you don't feel comfortable, I do think it's okay to say, I don't feel comfortable, answering that question, or I'm not sure how that question pertains to my work experience, or, however you really feel, comfortable wording that. I think that sometimes with those answers, it's almost giving that answer, but not, without giving that specific. So an answer, but not an answer, or maybe an answer with a question, or kind of just answering their question with a question. And so I definitely think that it can take some playing around with. And I think that, with your answers, I think it's important, for everyone to personally decide if this employer feels this way about me because of this answer or because of this part of my status. Is that truly a position that you would like to continue pursuing? And I think that that can be a really tough, part to answer, but I do think that's an important part of that reflection process. If they, are asking questions that are, geared negatively. I think I saw somewhere in the chat where someone said about having children or something like that. Is that an employer that you would want to work for that doesn't value, your role within your family and the duties and, the responsibilities that come along that, or, again, your limitations due to your disability, not understanding that. And so I think that sometimes those types of questions can really provide a lot more answers for you as the participant in the interview than necessarily them as an employer. So I would also, just tell everyone to feel empowered, and that, your most authentic self is so important, and your experience provides so much, depth to that workplace. And so it's, not, it's really important to not discredit, what you're bringing to the table.
Great response, Jamie. Yeah, and I would love to expand on that slightly to say um, what you are doing here tonight by participating in a session like this, educating yourself, informing yourself is a great step, especially if you think about Jamie's tools that she shared, the 4 E's. So you are learning more about what is and isn't okay. And then really the key here that I heard Jamie respond again with is empowerment. And know that it can, for some, feel challenging to respond in an interview, especially it sounds like you're saying that you've had this happen multiple times. So maybe you're feeling a little bit concerned about going into repeated interviews with this happening. Um, but I think that Jamie's response was absolutely correct, that feeling empowered to say, "Ooh, that, I really don't feel comfortable answering that question right now. I'd love to talk more about the experience that I bring to the table and more about this role." And then really taking it as information for yourself. In every interview, they are interviewing you as the candidate and you are interviewing them as the company. And so, um, I couldn't have said it more beautifully than Jamie, but you should feel empowered to find companies that won't put you in a position that makes you uncomfortable right from the first moment in an interview. Um, okay. So we've got about 1 minute left. Um, So we have a question here that says, how do you navigate the very real experience of not being successful in the job search due to a protected class category? when you're not in the company yet.
Absolutely. And so I would say with that, it's important to number one, give yourself that grace, and that space to be able to know that sometimes it really has nothing to do with you, and really your work ethic or kind of what you bring to the job. And sadly sometimes it can kind of come down to those individual factors, sadly. And I think that it's really really important to keep in mind again, like, who you are and what you bring to the table, and that the light that you shine might be the perfect fit for another organization, but it might not be for that specific company. And truthfully, that's okay. And it is hard, though. It's still hard, and it's still very, very difficult. But I think one of the biggest recommendations is, you know, still of course doing that active work and trying to grow. But I think if the situation is coming down to that discrimination, then you're not the problem in that aspect. You've done nothing to bring that upon yourself, and it's a sad situation. And I also firmly want you to know that you're not alone in feeling like that. And there are lots of different support resources. There are lots of different LinkedIn posts and groups and things like that you can really become a part of and be empowered. And I think through those different communities that have those conversations, then a lot of the times you will see other opportunities start to come up, or they're like, hey, I work for a company that's wonderful and very inclusive. You should take a look at this opportunity. And so I think that it's important to not get discouraged, to try to still do that networking, and still try to seek those like-minded people like you in your field, no matter what it is or what that looks like. Because I think that is really going to be what kind of gets you through, and helps you still kind of seek that passion.
My goodness, you're making me tear up at your light might not be the right shine for a particular company, but you will find the space that it is. All right, everybody. Well, we are at time for the evening. So thank you so much for Jamie. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much to Jamie. Thank you to all of you for being here in attendance this evening. This is the last session of Career Day 2023. We're so glad to have you. We are going to be sending a survey tomorrow after the event. So if you could fill it out, let us know how we did. That would really mean quite a lot. And as a reminder, these sessions are recorded, so they will be available on the SNHU Career Services YouTube channel in 2 to 3 business days. Um, and then, apologies for my cough. If you asked a question in today's session and we were unable to respond, or if you have additional questions in the future, please feel welcome to reach out to Career Services anytime. We'll get you connected with a career advisor or the department that is going to be most helpful to you. And then whenever you're ready, Jamie, we can hop to the handshake slide. So finally, for students and alumni, please check out Handshake to find more SNHU career events in the future. I'm going to include a link to Handshake in the chat, but I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you all so much.